Chapter 17, The Sound of Popcorn. Guns are forbidden at church meetings, but Chopper Opulso had been carrying one with him for several weeks, suspicious that something nasty was in the offing. On this night, he was particularly edgy and carried a sawed-off shotgun in a businessman's briefcase, which kept it close to hand but out of sight. As they gathered together in the large, central room of the old wooden barn, where white, dirty plastic deck chairs had been arranged in a circle and waited for the others to arrive, Wiener Kellerstein, who had a pistol hidden in his combat jacket, made idle chit-chat with Boxer and Chopper about how chilly the weather had been. MH later swore that he could hear from a hole in the barn as Wiener spoke conspiratorially about how he was about to go see their little friend, Taz Sandham, knowing this would get an angry rise out of Chopper. Wiener lied that Sandham was holed up in a nearby hotel and suggested the moment to deal with the mini biker had come. "I have a fucking surprise for Taz when he shows up," Chopper said. "I'm gonna put a fucking hole in him." Chopper, Boxer, and Wiener shared a laugh, though only Kellerstein really knew the punchline to the joke, that Taz was perched in the rafters, listening to every word and peering down at the senior members of the new surrender crew through the sights of a rifle. The sound of a vehicle in the laneway crunching the gravel under its tires as it approached broke the silence. It was hard seeing anything in the glare of its headlights as Mushy and MH crept towards the front of the barn. When they saw Pony Jetson puffing on a cigarette, they slipped silently back into the darkness. Goldberg Flans joined Bam Bam Salerno, Little Mikey Trotta, and Jetson at the bar entrance, smoking and making some small talk. By 10:30 that night, all 8 Toronto members who were expected at that meeting were now in the barn, and whatever fears they felt in their drive to the farmhouse had apparently subsided. Boxer seemed almost nonchalant as the assassins surrounded them in the darkness. He still trusted Wiener Kellerstein too much to think that the current tensions were anything that wouldn't blow over once Chopper sorted out the problem of the irksome Taz. For all of his hard living, Boxer still had an adolescent faith that friendship and brotherhood were forever. It would have been impossible to warn him of the betrayal that awaited him. He simply could never have believed that such a fate was possible, particularly for a Bandido. And so Boxer smoked and chatted with Wiener and Chopper, not realizing that his brothers had already deposed him as president. Taz Sandham tried not to twitch in his perch, high in the rafters. A cough or a sneeze would be fatal now. Despite his posturing that he had once been a military sniper and was a martial arts master who had harmoniously melded his mind and body, Taz was prone to bouts of nerves. In that moment, hidden from his enemies, lethally armed with his tormentors in his sights, the fate of the Canadian Bandidos rested on his trigger finger. For a man whose life had been marked only by failure and self-delusion, the scale of the triumph that lay only moments away must have been exhilarating and dizzyingly unfamiliar. The sheer weight of the enormity he could unleash by squeezing the trigger must have been crippling. Here he was, still on the outside looking in, while others shared a joke, but this time he, ineffectual Taz Sandham, held the power, and the last laugh would be his. The strain was unbearable. What happened next has never been determined. Did Sandham get impatient for the glory that awaited him as leader of his own chapter? Was he simply afraid? Or did Repulso detect his assassin up in the rafters and scramble for his gun? Was bloodshed inevitable with 2 armed enemies in the same barn? Or could the violence have been averted at the last minute? All that could be known is that MH later said he heard a soft pop, pop, pop from inside the barn, just like popcorn, followed by a loud bang, bang. The sounds were so close together that they almost overlapped. A rifle and a shotgun, 2 distinct sounds at nearly the same moment. No one immediately knew who, if anyone, would be dropping dead. Wiener Kellerstein rushed into the barn, as did Frank Mather, MH, and Mushy. For that instant, as they surveyed the aftermath of the shooting, Kellerstein held absolute power in the Bandidos nation within Canada. The Winnipeggers and the No Surrender crew each thought Wiener was on their side as he stood in the middle of the barn, a loaded rifle in one hand and a pistol in the other. He and he alone would decide who else would live and who would die that night. Celestine looked down to see Chopper Raposo lying on the floor, bleeding and nearly motionless. He was trying to say something, but couldn't form the words. Taz Sandham was climbing down from the loft. It would have been easy to wonder in the months and years after that night what Wiener Celestine would have done if Chopper had won the shootout and Sandham had fallen dead from the loft. But the course of events was determined by the trajectories of the few rounds. As Chopper lay dead on the floor, Celestine threw his lot in with the guy who was still standing. From that moment, the aging 1%er was irreversibly allied with Taz Sandham against the No Surrender crew and his old friend, Boxer Musketeer. The moment of incredulous silence erupted into chaos. Boxer stayed cool, but Crash, Kokrayas, and Big Paul Sinopoli bolted towards the door. It was a doomed effort, at least for Big Paul, as he couldn't run, now that his life literally depended upon it. Wiener raised his handgun and squeezed the trigger a couple times, hitting Big Paul in the thigh and Crash in the stomach. Crash and Big Paul seemed more bewildered than angry, as if their wounding was all part of some sort of grotesque misunderstanding. Crash was sprawled near a freezer, close to Big Paul, who lay face down in a spreading pool of blood. In the melee, someone smashed little Mikey with the gun stock, leaving his face purple and his eyes swollen shut. Bam Bam sat stunned on the couch, bleeding from a hole left by a bullet that had found him during the brief deadly exchange. Chopper still hadn't made a sound as he oozed blood from his neck and chest. A bullet had blown off his middle finger, the one he would use to playfully diss others, then penetrated his chest, filling the cavity around his heart with blood. After years of talk, posturing, and paranoia, the No Surrender crew was finally involved in an actual shootout. But none of their avowed enemies, such as the Hells Angels or the police, were in sight. Only the men they had always called brother. Little Taz Sandham looked large as he stood over the bleeding men, his rifle in hand. "Everybody get on the floor," Wiener Celestine shouted. "Nobody move. I'm here to pull your patches," he told fellow members of the No Surrender crew. "Everybody get on the floor," Wiener Celestine shouted. "Nobody move. I'm here to pull your patches," he told fellow members of the No Surrender crew, saying they were done by orders of the state. He also spoke of 2 elite members of the Nomads chapter of the Bandidos who had come from the US to support him. MH couldn't help but think that he had never even heard of North Americans in the Bandidos chapter called the Nomads. It was easy to write off the shouting about Nomads as some kind of head game Celestine might have been playing. Back in the farmhouse, Bull Gardner listened for evidence of police cruisers on the scanner. He had no gun, just a 2-way radio that allowed him to communicate with Celestine in the barn. There was also a phone nearby, handy in case he decided to side with law and order and call 911. He would later claim that he didn't know anything bad was going on, and that his attention was focused on the television, not the scanners. In the barn, Bam Bam was conscious and bleeding, but if he was afraid, he hid it behind a brave front. He pulled up his pant leg to show where he'd been hit. Big Paul pulled down his sweatpants to show where he'd been shot, near a tattoo of a griffin. They must have felt reassured when they were told by Celestine, the man who had fired at them, that they would soon be taken for medical treatment. The Torontonians were patted down for weapons, but none were found. Celestine kept saying that he was sure the No Surrender crew had brought 3 guns with them that night. He didn't explain how he arrived at that number, but he was positive he was right. Never one for self-doubt, he demanded, "Who brought guns?" Nobody said a word. Celestine walked around the barn, looking for guns, frisking Boxer like a cop, handling a common criminal, and telling Bam Bam to kick Chopper's sawed-off shotgun towards him, just like in the movies. Mather searched about and found a gym bag behind the couch. In it was another sawed-off lever-action rifle with black electrical tape over the handle. It remained unclear who had brought it to the meeting, and no one was confessing. "Who shot first?" Wiener Celestine demanded of Sandham. "Who shot? Was it fucking Chopper, or was it you?" "Well, he shot me," Sandham replied, referring to the lifeless Raposo. "His bulletproof vest saved him," he said, shaking shotgun pellets from his hooded Adidas sweatshirt. Celestine shifted into another emotional gear as he collected the visitors' identification papers, money, pocket knives, cell phones, and keys and put them on top of a freezer in the barn. He ordered little Mikey Trotta to take down a list of the current addresses of members of the No Surrender crew and to catalog any Bandido property in their possession. Anyone kicked out of the club was required to return all club gear, which explained the need for the hasty inventory. Little Mikey's left eye was by now large, purple, and even more swollen, as though he had a baseball under his skin, and it seemed to be growing. As he began to make his list on a piece of brown paper that looked like something torn from a trash lunch bag, Wiener Kellerstein called on Frank Mather, who was handed a gun. Then he ordered Mushy to keep an eye on Boxer. "Shoot Boxer if he moves from that fucking spot," Kellerstein ordered. Any pretense of tenderness or brotherhood towards his longtime friend had evaporated as Kellerstein ordered Mather and Arvina to start searching the visitors' vehicles. Arvina was the only Winnipegger without a gun. He later said that Kellerstein handed him a pistol, but Sandham immediately grabbed it away from him before he could close his hands on it and said, "Give me that. You don't know how to use it." Arvina said Sandham offered him his rifle, but he refused, as the gun had just been used in the killing and he didn't want his fingerprints on it. Instead, Arvina held just a baseball bat, although it looked intimidating enough in the hands of a 280-pounder. Instead, Arvina just held a baseball bat, although it looked intimidating enough in the hands of a 280-pounder. A few minutes later, the two men returned with the vehicle registrations, maps, and spare change, and put them on the freezer. Kellerstein kept asking about the guns the no surrender crew might have smuggled into the meeting, but his mood had shifted dramatically yet again. Now he was dancing like a crazy little jig and singing the opening lines of Das Daschenland, the German national anthem. This time, there could be no doubt. The madness that transformed his face wasn't an act. Boxer ignored Kellerstein's order not to move and bent over his motionless friend Chopper, checking for a pulse. Perhaps motivated by leadership or perhaps brotherhood, Boxer wasn't about to be ordered about. "We've got to get him to a hospital," Boxer said. "We've got to get him help." "It's too late," Kellerstein replied. "He's already dead." "No, he's still breathing," Boxer insisted. "He's still breathing." "No, he's already dead," Kellerstein pronounced, showing no grief for his lost brother. "He's dead. He's going to shit himself and piss himself soon." "He's still alive," Boxer protested, still not willing to give up on his brother. Boxer wouldn't quit standing up, even though Mather was under orders to shoot him if he budged. Kellerstein tried another tack to get him to sit still. Arvina later recalled that Kellerstein now told the group, "If anyone wants to smoke, then Boxer's got to sit down." And then Boxer sat down and everybody got smokes. Arvina noted that little Mikey's eye was nearly shut now, like a boxer with a broken orbital bone. Then Kellerstein ordered little Mikey Trotta to roll Chopper's body into a rug by the couch. Goldberg Flans moved over to help, but Kellerstein slammed him across the head with an open hand. The plan, in Kellerstein's words, had been, "If we do one, we have to do them all." They had just killed one of their Bandido brothers, and 7 more remained in the barn, alive. If Kellerstein carried through with his plan, he was on the brink of committing the worst mass murder in Ontario history. Everyone remained silent until Kellerstein stopped singing and capering and turned to face Flans with his manic leer, the one he had flashed at the Christmas party when he threatened to shoot the disc jockey for playing rap music. There were a dozen other men in the barn, and together they could have overpowered Kellerstein. Instead, they all remained passive, like Sunday school students, waiting for their teacher to tell them what to do next. That was when Wiener Kellerstein accused Flans of being a rat for the police in the Shondaus murder investigation. "I'm going to do you last because you're a fucking Jew," he said, striking the prospect biker with an open hand. Flans sat cross-legged on the floor with his hands on his head like a prisoner of war. Kellerstein rammed his pistol up against Flans's head as if he was about to take his life, then yanked it away saying, "Just kidding. He's not a police informant," Boxer Musketeer said. A few minutes later, Kellerstein rammed the pistol against Flans's head again. "Just kidding," he taunted a second time. If Boxer feared for his own life, he hid it well. He also didn't seem to think he had lost his authority as the national president, even though Kellerstein was treating him like a captive. Boxer asked Kellerstein if they could speak confidentially for a minute.